In this video, we're going to introduce absolute extrema. So we talked about local extrema before, but now we're using the term absolute. As we previously discussed, local extrema, which are the points that are higher or lower to anything around them. So I could have something like this. This is higher than here, but this is still a local extrema because it's bigger than everything else around them. These are just the peaks and valleys of our graphs, and this is a local minimum. We'll now discuss absolute extrema. As the name suggests, an absolute maximum is the highest value for the entire function. It's the absolute biggest thing you're going to get out. The absolute smallest thing you're going to get out is the lowest y value for the entire function. All right, so we're just, instead of looking at kind of generally around this area, what's our max and mins, we're looking at the entire function. What is the biggest thing I get out? All right, so in the absolute max and min of the following function, you notice a lot of times for absolute max and mins, your graphs or your intervals are cut off. You don't look at the whole function. Because if you look at the whole function, a lot of times we have these arrows that go off forever, and there's no top bound. There's no kind of absolute max or min. But when it's cut off, you can find your max and mins a little bit better. All right, so for this graph, what's our absolute max and min? I'd start with maximum. You kind of work your way down from the top, and the first thing you hit is the highest value, and that's right there. Our absolute max is y equals 2.5. All right, the highest y value I get is 2.5. Do the same thing for the minimum. I kind of work my way from the bottom, and the first thing I hit is right there. So my absolute minimum is, also I messed this up. It's not 2.5 because my scale is not a box for 1. That's a little bit more than 0.5. So maybe that's, or sorry, this is 1 here. So it's like 1.25. Right. This point, that's 5, so it's a little less than 5, so that may be like negative 4.75. But the important thing is just identifying from this graph, all right, the lowest point there is my absolute max. The highest point here is my absolute, other one's the lowest min, this one's absolute max. All right, what about on this graph? Let's do min first. My min, I come from the bottom, and it's that point's the first thing I hit, and my min is y equals negative 3. What's my absolute maximum value? All right. This one's actually hard because you might think, well, I just come from the top, I hit this point, and my absolute max is about negative 1.5. But that's actually not true because my graph doesn't actually hit negative 5 or negative 1.5 because it's open circle. We might say, well, if it's not negative 1.5, then maybe it's negative 1.4. But negative 1.4 is like, sorry, not 1.4, 1.6 because it's a little bit lower. But 1.6 is here. And you see there's a little bit of gap there. So maybe it's negative 1.55. But that's only there. There's a little bit of gap. So maybe it's negative 1.59. But if you zoomed in, there'd still be a little bit of gap. You could say negative 1.999. But you could zoom in more and get more nines, and whatever. All right, so this doesn't work when there's this open circle here. I get really close to a value, but I never actually achieve that highest value. So this one actually doesn't have an absolute max. It just has an absolute min. All right, so when you see open circles, it can make really weird things happen, like you not having an absolute maximum or minimum. All right, here's one for you to try your own, less confusing. All right, just find the absolute max and min for this function. And I'll tell you the answer in 3, 2, 1. All right, the min is negative 1. The max is positive 5. All right, so there's gonna be only one biggest value. You only ever have one absolute max and one absolute min. It might happen in multiple locations. It might look like this. You can see I hit that absolute max 3 times, but there's only one absolute maximum value, whatever that y value is. All right, so it's a little bit different than local extrema. Local extrema, I can have kind of basically an infinite number of them if I just keep going. All right, all of these peaks and valleys are local extrema, but I only have one absolute max and one absolute min. All right, so absolute means just one thing, the absolute biggest. And as always, our goal now is to do this without being given a graph and do it with a function or an expression. All right, so it can only be one absolute max and absolute min. All right, just remember that if you're getting asked for one of them, you shouldn't get multiple answers. You're going to find multiple things that might be it, but there's only one final answer. And they can happen at a local extrema or the end of a graph. So we saw if you had a thing that looked like this, the absolute max happens at the end, but the absolute min happens kind of in the middle. All right, so this will be important going forward.